Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Monday, April 1st, and the Yankees emerged from opening weekend bruised and battered by the Orioles of all teams, losing 2 out of 3 to the AA Baltimore club, a team that lost 115 games last year, a team actually projected by Fangraphs to be the worst in the majors. Fangraphs has the Orioles winning just 62 games this year, and the Yankees just embarrassed themselves again with poor defense, anemic hitting with runners in scoring position, Stanton in particular, who's now out with a biceps injury, terrible bullpen work, and an awful starting pitching by Jay Happ yesterday, one of the key pieces in what we were told would be a championship rotation. Yes, I am back, your Yankee prophet of woe and lamentation. Listener beware. Brutal honesty lies ahead. But first, an apology. I've always sort of taken pride in, doing what I say I'm going to do. I think it's important in life. And I did say that there would be off-season episodes, and there were not. And the reason for that is that I'm working on a second podcast called Gotham Variety that will debut on August 1st. Kind of an audio drama / talk show with lots of bells and whistles. You can find out more about that show at gothamvariety.com. But that's just taken up all of my time and then some. I've been doing all the writing, casting, recording, editing, social media, etc., on top of a full-time day job as a musician. So it's just been, as my sister likes to say, cray as far as the workload. So that's why I've been MIA, for which I do apologize. But there will be a show this season. I'll be releasing episodes on the 1st and 15th of each and every month, and I also plan to release some instant reactions to games here and there along the way. So the episodes may be a little more abbreviated than they were last year as my work on Gotham Variety continues. So no interview today, but we'll have our good friend E.J. Fagan back on the show on the 15th to talk Yankee baseball. Also, our good friend Dr. Paul Semendinger will join the show 1 month from today. So yes, the show does go on. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, and you can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle, some interesting results when we asked if the Yankees will win their division for the first time since 2012, and I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers, actually 2 questions. There was a bit of a backlog. First, a question about some revelations this weekend concerning Suzyn Waldman, and second, about the new look Mets. And in just a minute, we'll get into some more of my thoughts on the opening weekend against the Orioles, as well as my take on Brian Cashman's offseason moves. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these players was originally picked by the Baltimore Colts and the New York Yankees? Was it A, Jim Harbaugh, B, Joe Montana, C, Steve Young, or D, John Elway? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
I get that it's only Game 3, but A, last time I checked, Game 3 counts as much as any other game. B, it was against a historically terrible team at home, coming on the heels of a humiliating beating at home in October by our most bitter rival. And C, all those flaws I enumerated in my open were carryovers from last year. And even before that, since 2013, check this out, the Yankees are 24th in Major League Baseball in batting average with runners in scoring position. And overall in this series against the Orioles, they went 6 for 29 with men in scoring position, 2 for 12 yesterday, stranded 33 runners over the course of the series, 14 yesterday. So we'll see what happens tonight. We got another rebuilding team in town, the Detroit Tigers. Clint Frazier has been called up to replace Stanton. And the Yankees, I'm hearing as I record this, are maybe going to use an opener with Severino and Sabathia on the shelf. But this performance this weekend was unacceptable. Some bright spots. Tanaka and Paxton both good. LeMahieu, I liked what I saw from him. Glaber had some hits. But the Orioles all but handed yesterday's game to the Yankees on a silver platter, walking a ton of guys. And just as soon as we had runners on base, the Yankees went into that deer in the headlights mode. All of them. Even Voit. who was good in those spots last year, but Stanton just flailing away at changeups, missing by a mile with the tying and go-ahead runs on base, struck out on 3 pitches. Sanchez, I mean, yes, he hit a solo home run, but he had his second error in as many days, both of which led to runs, and he also struck out 3 times. So yes, only game 3 of 162, but an inauspicious beginning to say the least. And again, many of the problems we saw in these 3 games we've seen for a while now. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Sanchez will suddenly morph into a good defensive catcher, or that Stanton will suddenly start hitting in the clutch, or that Greg Bird will ever again perform to his potential outside of spring training games, or that Tommy Kahnle is anything but a flash in the pan. Kahnle had no idea where his fastball was going yesterday. No idea. Walked the bases loaded. I would need evidence to support the contention that those trends are going to reverse themselves, and honestly, I'm seeing mounting evidence which points in the opposite direction. There's plenty of talent on this team, but this business of getting destroyed by teams that won't even sniff the playoffs this year is not exactly the hallmark of a championship ball club. Now, as far as the Yankees offseason, I thought it was a very mixed bag. Quite frankly, a bit lacking. My very general take was that the guys that they added, especially Paxton, I liked. But the guys that they re-signed, I was not nearly as wild about. With the Paxton deal, I wasn't sorry at all to see Justice Sheffield go. He's had command issues all along and was fairly awful in AAA last year. And now righty Eric Swanson, who we also gave up, showed some promise last year, but you have to give up something to get something, and Paxton has the stuff of a legitimate, or let's say a borderline ace. Throws strikes, which I love, especially after the nibbling we got out of Sonny Gray last year. It's not a huge contract either. It's not, long-term. Paxton only signed for this season and next at a very reasonable base salary of $8.5 million. That's less than Sonny Gray is making, who, in case you thought Sonny Gray would magically morph into a decent pitcher in Cincinnati, think again. Sonny was just horrendous yesterday. Could not last 3 innings, 4 walks, 3 runs, a hit batsman, 71 pitches in 2+ innings. So basically, new uniform, same garbage from Sonny Gray, and the Reds have to pay him through 2024. Dude. So obviously, Paxton, a major upgrade. I liked the DJ LeMahieu signing, former batting champion, good eye, great glove. But as far as the returning guys who were free agents, I thought re-upping 36-year-old Jay Happ was questionable at best. Yes, he pitched well here last year, but he still gave up a lot of home runs. He always has. Got shelled in the ALDS opener against Boston last year. Got shelled yesterday by AA Baltimore. Now, this too was not a huge commitment by Cashman, 2 years, but $34 million is not nothing. And sure, maybe yesterday was just a hiccup, and Happ turns out to be a solid number 3 after Paxton and Severino, if healthy, big if. But to me, as far as the rotation goes, Cashman failed to paint in the bold strokes that the situation called for, but rather, other than Paxton, sort of nibbled around the edges as far as rebuilding this rotation. I've never thought Cashman paid enough attention to starting pitching. I think he's fallen in love with power hitting to the exclusion of almost everything else. And when I look at Tanaka, Paxton, questionable with rotator cuff issues, Severino, questionable home run prone and aging Jay Happ, over the hill and coming off a heart procedure, Sabathia. I don't know about you, but that doesn't scream, championship rotation to me, not by a long shot. Now, Cashman also picked up Gio Gonzalez on the cheap. Maybe that pans out, but this rotation looks to me like an aging used car held together by Scotch tape and Elmer's glue, not the revamped Lamborghini that we were led to believe was on tap. Now, with the bullpen, we lost Robertson, but I thought the Ottavino signing was great and predict that he will end up being as good, actually better than D-Rob. He looked very good all spring and in the opening series against Baltimore, gave up nothing. But again, I was less enthused by re-signing Zach Britton. I think, like Sonny Gray, Britton's reputation is based on basically one amazing season, a ridiculous 2016. His velocity has been steadily declining. He throws basically one pitch, so I was not thrilled with the Zach Britton signing. Actually, one thing more I wanted to say about the starting rotation. I wasn't that bummed out that we didn't sign Patrick Corbin. Everyone thought he would come to New York because he grew up a Yankee fan. That's the kind of thing that fans make a big deal about, but which plays into free agents' decision-making process approximately 0% of the time. I thought the Nationals overpaid him. He does not have a sustained track record of success, myriad injuries, including a Tommy John, and 6 years at $140 million seems frankly insane to me. That's what he got from Washington. He pitched well yesterday against the Mets, but if that's a contract that I'm glad we don't have to deal with, especially with Stanton on the books for like a century, which that's going to be an albatross if it isn't already. And let's not forget the other albatross, the invisible man, Jacob Ellsbury, the phantom crown jewel of our outfield, one of the worst signings in franchise history, who we're paying $21 million to this year and next and the year after that, to basically sit on his keister and play video games. Just Cashman has made some great trades, don't get me wrong. I mean, just look at Luke Voigt for Gallegos and Shreve. That alone is a masterpiece. The Hicks trade was great, but Cashman does not walk on water despite what he may think. And the Ellsbury deal is proof positive, as is the Boone hire, I think, which I believe will be a permanent stain on Cashman's legacy. The more I think about it with Boone, the less I blame Boone for whatever mistakes he might make. He really just accepted a job that anyone in the baseball world would have killed for. And the more I blame Cashman, this is on him. But getting back to the offseason, with the infield, the Yankees did what they needed to do to offset the loss of Didi Gregorius, Troy Tulowitzki, who were basically paying nothing, and LeMahieu, both very competent defensive infielders. Again, not long-term commitments, so these are all good. Now, what I didn't like, hated in fact, were the re-signings of Sabathia and Gardner. I said repeatedly last year on this podcast that Sabathia looked as if he was going to have a coronary on the mound. Well, maybe I should have been a doctor like my dad, because it turns out the dude has a heart condition. He had an angioplasty in December after experiencing chest pain while exercising, blocked artery, which is a very serious thing. So that signing to me was just idiocy. This is a guy who's been running on fumes for 2 years with bad knees, an absolute dud in the playoffs 2 years in a row. And Gardner, who's been a good Yankee over the course of his career, as has Sabathia, is another guy that's just well past his expiration date. And you might say, well, it's a good thing we have him now that Hicks is on the DL for the 8,000th time. But we could have somebody better, I thought Cashman probably did the right thing in passing on Harper. As I said earlier, we've already got a massive, lengthy Stanton contract on the books on top of Ellsbury. But to me, Cashman should have been more aggressive and found a better solution, certainly a better solution than Sabathia. There was talk that Corey Kluber was available and being dangled by the Indians. That's the kind of deal that I was hoping for, quite frankly. Now, one more thing in the bullpen. We're hearing once again that this is, quote-unquote, the best bullpen in baseball, maybe the best in baseball history. No, it's not. Chad Green has very much come back to earth, and I think the same thing might be happening to Jonathan Holder. Canley's a mess. Tarpley was awful yesterday. Betances' velocity was way down in spring training, like way down. His fastball is normally 98 miles an hour. It didn't top 93. And he is now shut down with a right shoulder impingement, whatever the hell that is. Sometimes I think they make these names up. A shoulder impingement. What is that? That sounds like something that happens like on a crowded subway. But is it a good bullpen? Yeah. But I also think it's very overrated. And I think the offense, as we saw this weekend, this is more or less the same team as last year. Despite the infield tinkering that Cashman did with the same offensive approach. And I believe we'll see the same results, namely feast or famine. Tons of home runs, games in which we put up like football scores, and games where we strike out and fail to hit with runners in scoring position over and over again. But on the plus side, Aaron Judge looks great. I like what I've seen from Glaber at the plate so far. I think Andujar will come around. But Sanchez, talking offensively now, not defensively, I'm not nearly as optimistic about him at the plate. He's been missing a lot of pitches he was on that he was crushing 2 years ago. I was really sort of hoping that Cashman would sell high and trade him this offseason and pick up JT Realmuto. But at least in his public remarks, Cashman has doubled down, tripled down, I think he said, on Sanchez. He thinks Gary Sanchez is just the greatest thing since Thurman Munson, not seeing it. So overall, again, being completely honest here, this was an okay offseason at best, no better. The rotation is on balance, probably not any better, maybe a little. Bullpen the same, I would say. The offense remains, talented but problematic. So I'd give Cashman a C+. Now let's give him a straight C. This offseason I thought demanded bold strokes, big changes. I believe it demanded a new coaching staff. I mean, I didn't expect Boone to be replaced, but Severino was tipping pitches for months last year apparently, and we re-up the pitching coach. What's that about? I mean, so in the final analysis, I get that we're 3 games in here, but especially in light of all the injuries, I can't really make the argument that we're any better than last year. And personally, I think we might be a little worse. I'd be surprised, very surprised, if the Yankees hit 100 wins again this year. I think this is a 90, 91 win team at best. That's my honest opinion. Take it or leave it. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which player was originally picked by the Baltimore Colts and the New York Yankees? The answer? D. John Elway. And now, here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. Will the Yankees win their divisions for the first time since 2012 this year? And not a shock, 90% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said yes, and 10% said no. So before I give my answer, let's take an admittedly subjective look at the Red Sox offseason, moves and non-moves, as Boston looks to do something that no team has done since our very own Bombers back in 99 and again in 2000 repeat as champions of Major League Baseball. Predictably, after their World Series run, the Red Sox started slow this weekend. Their top 4 starters all took an absolute beating in Seattle. Sale, Eovaldi, Erod, Porcello combined to give up 28 runs in those 4 games. Sale only pitched 9 innings in spring training, so there's that. But Eovaldi, he may have pitched his bionic arm off in the fall. Remember how many innings Cora had him throw in the postseason, which made sense and definitely was a major reason why they ended up with a parade in Boston. But as far as their offseason moves, they brought back Yankee destroyer Steve Pearce, who's out with a calf strain right now, on a 1-year deal. That seemed like a no-brainer to me after his amazing playoff performance. Now, health remains an issue with Pearce. He's 36 and generally spends quality time on the DL every year. It's not DL now, it's IL, right? Injured list, whatever, DL, IL, potato. But the Sox, they do have Mitch Moreland at first, which somewhat mitigates that situation. Now, Eovaldi for 4 years at $68 million is much more of an open question. As I said, he shined in both his starts and his relief appearances in the postseason, 22 innings, 1.61 ERA. That's spectacular. But, he's 29 years old, tons of injuries on that resume, including 2 Tommy Johns. And let's face it, he's been a mixed bag throughout his career, even when healthy. His career ERA is 4.16, and he gives up a lot of home runs. He always has, and he did in Seattle on Friday night, just got shelled. So I think that's a risk that, frankly, I'm happy the Yankees did not take. But let's be honest, despite their rocky debut out west, the Red Sox still have a very formidable starting rotation that will come around more likely than not. Now, what puzzled me was their inactivity with the bullpen this offseason as they watched Joe Kelly go to the Dodgers and Craig Kimbrell remains twisting in the wind as a free agent, as does Dallas Keuchel, by the way. I saw last night the Mets might be kicking the tires on Dallas Keuchel, but right now the Red Sox do not have a closer. They'll undoubtedly sign somebody by the trading deadline, but there aren't that many good closers out there in reality, and it's something that a lot of teams are going to be after. So, the Fangraphs website in their bullpen ratings has the Red Sox at 27th in Major League Baseball. Not good. So it's entirely possible that GM Dave Dombrowski's failure to shore up that bullpen will burn them, especially with the fragility of some of their starting rotation. Now, the offense, on the other hand, remains absolutely dynamic. Best in the majors, I think. There's no other team that can trot out 2 hitters at the level of Mookie Betts and J.D. Martinez, and the others are coming along. I mean, Devers, who they just extended, Jackie Bradley Jr., Pierce, who I already mentioned. I mean, make no mistake, this remains a very scary lineup. Boston is never, ever out of a game, especially in Fenway. They'll be contending for sure, obviously. And I do think that despite the World Series hangover, despite the wear and tear on that rotation, and despite the cloudy bullpen situation, that the Red Sox will find a way to win the division yet again on the strength of that offensive attack. I think they'll make some shrewd trades before the deadline. They've never been shy about spending money, and also on the strength of superior managing, superior to the Yankees at least. I think Cora is a much better manager than Aaron Boone, and my prediction is that the Yankees will once again be facing a do-or-die wild card game in October. I hope I'm wrong. I really do, guys. But as I've said from the beginning, I'm always going to be honest with you on this podcast. There's no point in not being honest here. So that's what I actually think. And I hope I'm wrong. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from, actually two questions. We have two. One comes from Felicia in Manhattan, and the other comes from Robbie in Jersey City. Felicia writes, did you see the Newsday article about Suzyn Waldman? I never liked her as an announcer, but I was shocked and disgusted by what she's had to put up with, and am now her biggest fan. What are your thoughts on the article? Well, thanks for that question, Felicia. Yes, I did read it. I was disgusted by it as well. The article that Felicia refers to is by Laura Albanese, and it's called, this is a long headline, Pioneering Yankees broadcaster Suzyn Waldman has had to deal with sexism and abuse throughout her career, and it is indeed a horrifying but necessary read, a real eye-opener. Now, a lot of the most vicious stuff detailed in this article happened in her earlier days at WFAN in the 80s and 90s. When we're talking like people sending her used toilet paper, sending her excrement in the mail. I'm not making this up. Sending her excrement in the mail, sending her used condoms in the mail, just outraged by a female sports announcer, could not handle it. So, and she was also basically shunned by many fellow media members for a very long time. And worst of all, she needed a freaking security detail after games because of death threats. I'm not kidding. So, I mean, some of the details in this article, totally corroborated, by the way, really had my blood boiling. And look, I mean, is she my favorite Yankee radio announcer ever? No. It's pretty tough to top the duo of Sterling and Kay that was on for so many years. Those guys really kind of spoiled those of us lucky enough to be fans during those years. But by the same token, I do think that she's vastly improved. I mean, my main issue with Suzyn's style early on was that she was kind of hyper. You know, in baseball announcers, there's a kind of calm, easy delivery that works very well, in my opinion. But I don't know if if someone got to her or if she just self-corrected. But I think her delivery is much, much better now than it was when she started back in 2005. And there's no one really who's better informed. Well, maybe Michael Kay, who's better informed than Suzyn Waldman. She does her homework. She always has. And she's had to work harder to be able to survive in a hyper-competitive, male-dominated industry. So, it's pretty simple, guys. Anyone who sends human feces through the mail because the idea of a female broadcaster enrages him that much is not only doing life totally wrong, that individual does not belong in human society. They should really be put, preferably dropped from a fairly significant height by helicopter on a special private, like Alcatraz-like island where they can live with the rest of the overgrown babies who share their imbecilic worldview. I mean, this is pretty cut and dry in my opinion. Professionals should be judged on the merits and nothing else. Not gender, not race, religion, nothing. None of that should matter. And she's more than earned her stripes as Sterling's wing woman at this point. So yeah, Felicia, I'm pulling for her as well because, and I think if you read the article, you'll agree, given the endless crap that she's had to deal with over the years, throw in a harrowing battle with breast cancer, they don't come tougher than Suzyn Waldman. Next up is a question from Robbie in Jersey City who writes, I don't know if you'll want to answer this on your show, but I know that you follow all the teams, so what did you think of the Mets offseason? Well, thanks for that question, Robbie. It's a good one. And I did follow the Mets' very active offseason with interest. The Mets have a new GM, Brody Van Wagenen, formerly an agent with the sports division of the Creative Artists Agency. And as I've said before, the Mets in recent years, despite having money, have acted like a small market team, which, by the way, I sort of think Cashman has been doing recently. And speaking of small markets, man, did you see the attendance at the Marlins game on Friday night? 6,000. That's like double-A attendance. Terrible. But just as I was surprised that the Yankees got the Mariners to part with James Paxton after the year he had, I was also surprised that the Mets got Seattle to part with closer Edwin Diaz, who was just phenomenal last year, an all-star, and totally lights out, and Robinson Cano as well, in exchange for not much, really. I mean, severely underperforming reliever Anthony Swarzak, an aging Jay Bruce, and a trio of very young prospects that the Mets sent to Seattle in exchange for Diaz and Cano. As I've said many times, we can't know who quote-unquote won this deal until those prospects mature. But I gotta say, I like this trade from the Mets' standpoint, and I'm happy for their fans. Now, will they hate having to pay Robinson Cano when he's 40 and over the hill? I mean, they're on the hook for $24 million annually with him through 2023. I mean, yes, but in the short term at least, this trade, along with a host of other moves, bringing back Juris Familia, signing Wilson Ramos, who was the best catcher available in free agency, with the possible exception of Yasmani Grandal. Ramos is a guy who I'd say is defensively good, not great, but he did hit .306 last year and looked great in the opening series in Washington. And the Mets also added super utility man Jed Lowry as well. So what DJ LeMahieu is to us, Lowry is now to the Mets. He's a guy that can play pretty much any infield position. So, Robbie, these moves did indeed address many shortcomings, and they've got that scary rotation with the now extended Jacob deGrom to set the table. Now, will they get by Bryce Harper and the Phillies? I mean, probably not. I think the Mets will certainly be in the conversation this summer, and they'll certainly be better than last year. That's not a high bar, but I think the Mets did very well for themselves this offseason, and that's good. I personally always want all the New York teams to be good. I think it's good for the city, it's good for the tri-state area, I should say, and I know there are some Yankee fans who hate the Mets. I've never been one of them. I watch their games not infrequently, partly because I love their announcing team, but if I think back to some of the great sports viewing experiences of my entire life, Game 6 of the '86 World Series, which I watched that comeback as a high school senior with my mom, that's got to rank in the top 10 as far as edge-of-your-seat sports moments. So thanks for the question, Robbie. I think that the Mets are vastly improved, and they will be in the conversation this year. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, find us on Spotify, follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, like us on Facebook as well, and thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you again on April 15th. Take care.